Mota video YouTube description. Cinematic and emotional, he lost his leg in Vietnam. He never asked for sympathy. Every Sunday, he came to the same diner, sat at the same table, and quietly ordered the same meal. Until one day, the director of Veteran Affairs looked him in the eye and said, "You're making our guests uncomfortable." No one defended him until three Navy SEALs in dress blues stood up. This isn't a video about war. It's about the silent battle many veterans still face every single day, being forgotten, disrespected, and pushed aside. New episodes every week. Subscribe to for more real-life tales of sacrifice, dignity, and redemption. Subscribe here. Don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss when the truth stands tall. Part 1. This table is for customers, not relics. You're blocking the walkway, old man. Either move or we'll help you move. The words hit like a slap across the quiet diner. Heads turned, silverware paused midair. In the golden afternoon light of Liberty Diner in Charleston, South Carolina, time froze for half a second. The man they were speaking to didn't flinch. He just blinked slowly, adjusted the weight on his one good leg, and shifted his crutch to balance. His name was Henry Callahan, 79 years old, Navy corpsman, 2 tours in Vietnam. He had one leg and a sandwich on the way. What just happened in this scene? Why was a disabled Navy veteran publicly humiliated like that? And more importantly, who stood up? Type respect in the comments if you believe veterans should never be treated this way. And tell us, what would you have done if you were there? But before we get to that, let's rewind to just 5 minutes earlier. It was a Sunday, and like every Sunday for the last 6 years, Henry arrived at Liberty Diner at exactly 11:42 a.m. He parked his dented 97 Ford Ranger in the corner of the lot, took a full 30 seconds to swing his leg brace over the side, then tapped his crutch twice on the ground before moving forward. The staff knew him, especially Lydia, the soft-spoken waitress, with the brown ponytail and navy pin on her apron. She always reserved his usual spot, table 3 by the window, where the light was good enough for him to read his paper and the seat didn't wobble. But this Sunday, table 3 was occupied. A printed card sat neatly on top, reserved, VA Regional Director Calvin Mays and guests. Henry didn't complain. He never did. He simply nodded at Lydia, smiled faintly, and took table 6 near the hallway, close enough to the kitchen to hear the clatter, but far enough from the window that he couldn't read without squinting. He ordered his usual turkey sandwich, no cheese, black coffee, 1 sugar, no cream. He opened the Charleston Gazette with the same pair of frayed reading glasses he'd kept since the 80s. And he waited. Across the room, VA Regional Director Calvin Mays entered with his entourage, 3 men in suits and 1 woman with an iPad. Calvin was in his early 50s, tall, lean, clean-shaven, and sharp as the crease on his $900 trousers. He was here for a community visibility lunch, a public relations stop on the way to a golf fundraiser. When he saw Henry sitting at table 6, his expression changed. Mays turned to the manager and said, "That table's too close. It'll ruin the photo angles. Get him moved." The manager hesitated. Lydia tried to interject, "He's a veteran, sir." "That's Henry. He comes here every Sunday." Mays cut her off. "He can come back another time. This is a working lunch. We need space for our guests." And then he walked over. Not the manager, not the assistant. Calvin Mays himself. He leaned in just enough to let his cologne overwhelm the faint smell of coffee and bread, and then he said clearly enough for half the diner to hear, "This table is for customers, not relics from forgotten wars." A few gasps. A fork clattered. Lydia dropped a napkin. Henry didn't rise. He looked up, calm, wounded, humiliated, but not surprised. He reached slowly for his crutch, the one he'd carved himself from old walnut wood. And as he lifted it, his veteran ID tag, the plastic card with US Navy medic, and a faded photo from 1971 slipped from the lanyard around his neck and fell to the floor. It landed with a soft slap, right near the boots of a young man at the next table. That table, table 7, had 3 men. They'd been quiet the whole time, eating modestly, avoiding attention. But now all 3 turned in unison. They wore dress blues. The one in the center wore the insignia of a lieutenant commander in SEAL Team 2. To his left, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Chen. To his right, Petty Officer Second Class James Rodriguez. Veterans, active duty, decorated, and now alert. Monroe, the SEAL commander, didn't say a word. He set his fork down gently, adjusted the cuff on his jacket, and stood. Chen followed. Then Rodriguez. 3 movements choreographed by a shared code older than the flag outside. The room didn't breathe. Henry, still leaning on his crutch, looked at them. Recognition, past, silent, masculine, sacred. Rodriguez bent down, picked up the card, blew the dust from it, placed it in Henry's palm, and said softly, "Thank you for keeping your oath, sir." Lydia was now openly crying. The other guests sat frozen. Calvin Mays, who just moments earlier stood like a king, suddenly looked like a man very aware he was outnumbered in something far more important than votes or titles. Still he tried. "You 3 don't make the rules here," he said, voice cracking slightly. And that's when Monroe stepped forward. His voice was low, calm, terrifying in its authority. "No, sir. But we remember them." The manager tried to intervene. Calvin turned to leave, his face, red jaw, tight. But the damage was done. Phones were out. Stories were already being told. Henry didn't sit back down. Not yet. He looked at Monroe, at Rodriguez, at Chen. And for the first time in a very long time, he saw something that had been missing for years. Not pity, not protocol, but respect. He didn't ask for it, but they gave it anyway. And as Henry turned to find his seat again, all 3 SEALs stepped toward him, one movement, one message. The diner didn't erupt, it bowed. And just as Monroe pulled out the chair for Henry to sit, Lydia whispered, "He's never had anyone stand for him before." Part 2. You just humiliated a Navy medic in front of SEALs. Sir, you just made a mistake that's going to cost you more than your lunch. The words came flat, cold, and final. Lieutenant Commander Jason Monroe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had the full weight of silence behind him, and the attention of the entire diner had shifted. Henry Callahan, seated now, gently set his coffee down. He wasn't trembling anymore. The veteran ID card had been returned to his shirt pocket. His dignity, however, was still in question. Across the room, Calvin Mays straightened his tie. "Is that a threat?" "Number a correction," Monroe answered. The Liberty Diner had gone completely still. Lydia stood frozen behind the counter. Customers watched unmoving. Even the clink of silverware had vanished. Petty Officer Marcus Chen stepped forward. "You just humiliated a disabled veteran in front of 3 SEALs. Mays gave a dry, nervous laugh. "Oh, please. We're just trying to have a meeting. This man," he motioned at Henry, "is in the way of a federally scheduled outreach effort." "That's ironic, isn't it?" Rodriguez stepped forward. "What's ironic is you forgot what a veteran looks like. What would you have done standing next to Henry in that moment? Type dignity in the comments and subscribe to follow stories that remind America what respect truly looks like." Mace turned toward Lydia. You're responsible for seating. Move him." Lydia opened her mouth, but no sound came. Henry looked up, calm, centered. She's not moving anyone. She won't need to, Monroe added. Then he reached into his uniform and removed a small silver seal insignia pin. He laid it in the center of Henry's table. I've worn that for 20 years. But this table belongs to someone who earned it long before I did. The silence in the diner deepened. Mrs. Patel emerged from the back, expression unreadable. She walked directly to Mays. Come with me, now. He hesitated, then followed. When the office door shut behind them, Monroe remained standing. Sir, he said to Henry, if it's all right, we'd like to stay. Henry looked around. At the seals. At Lydia. At the brass plaque glinting faintly on the counter. He nodded. I'd be honored. They pulled their chairs closer. Lydia placed the sandwich and a fresh coffee in front of Henry, then quietly stepped away. Monroe looked over and said nothing, but she nodded back in silent thanks. My dad served in Desert Storm. Lydia whispered later to Rodriguez. He always said the quietest guys carried the heaviest stories. The bell above the door rang again. Another surprise. Mays walked back out, but something in him had changed. The edges of pride were gone. He walked to Henry's table. No swagger, just humility. I was wrong, he said, for more than just that day. Henry looked up. I read your record. Silver Star, Navy Cross. You pulled 6 Marines out during Tet, then worked janitorial shifts for 20 years. I didn't know. No, you didn't. I can't undo it. But I can do better. He placed a laminated card on the table, a lifetime VA priority access card. Access card with Henry's name etched in silver. I'm not asking forgiveness, but I'm asking permission to listen. Henry nodded slowly. Then come back, and don't speak next time. I will. Then the door opened again. A boy no older than 17 stepped in, wearing a freshly pressed navy dress uniform. He looked terrified, but determined. My grandfather served with you, said you saved his life, told me to find you. What's your name, son? Henry asked. Jacob Mitchell. Henry extended his hand. Welcome to the table. The boy sat. Monroe slid him a coffee. Chen shifted over. Lydia brought an extra plate. Mrs. Patel returned holding a new metal sign. She mounted it above table 3. The honor corner. No one sits here by accident. From that day on, it became a ritual. SEALs, veterans, families, everyone came. No hashtags, no cameras, no politics, only presence. Monroe later whispered to Henry, You've saved lives, sir, and you're still doing it. Henry shook his head. I never wanted this. Monroe smiled. That's why you deserve it. Stay with us, because part 3 is coming, and what happens next will change more than a table. Comment down below if you believe that one act of respect can ripple through a town, and subscribe to witness what happens when silence becomes legacy. Part 3. We don't sit when a veteran's being shamed. He lost his leg for this country. You just tried to take his dignity too. That line came from Petty Officer James Rodriguez. Quiet. Controlled. But it cracked through the tension like thunder splitting an old oak. Calvin Mays had just stepped back into the dining room, red-faced and visibly shaken from the private confrontation with Mrs. Patel. He wasn't expecting 3 Navy SEALs to still be standing, and he certainly didn't expect a crowd of everyday Americans staring at him like he was the one who didn't belong. Rodriguez took one more step forward. Monroe and Chen stayed seated next to Henry, calm and ready. The moment felt frozen in glass. Calvin glanced around, looking for someone, anyone to back him up. No one moved. Even the manager, who once followed his every word, now looked away, his eyes fixed on the kitchen floor. Henry, still seated, lifted his coffee cup with one hand, steady as a surgeon. He took a sip, exhaled, and placed it down gently. Then he turned to Calvin, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something more devastating: disappointment. "You know what hurts more than losing a leg?" Henry said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "It's watching someone paid to represent veterans treat them like furniture to be moved." Calvin swallowed hard. His usual armor of polished words and bureaucratic excuses was gone. All he had left was pride, but it was thin, fraying fast. "Mr. Callahan," he said, his voice unusually soft, "I didn't mean for it to come across like that." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Then how did you mean it?" That silence, just 5 seconds, felt eternal. "If you're still with us, comment the word dignity below, because that's what this moment is about. Not pity, not politics, just dignity. And hit that subscribe button if you believe no one who served should ever be treated like they're in the way." Then something unexpected happened. A voice from the far end of the room spoke up. An elderly woman, maybe in her late 70s, rose from her seat. She held a cane with a faded Navy wife sticker wrapped around it. "My husband never came home from Vietnam," she said, "but Henry used to check on me every Christmas. Never missed one. You know how I met him? At his second job, as a night shift janitor at the VA clinic. The same one you shut down for budget realignment, Mr. Mays." The diner inhaled together. May's expression changed, from defensive to embarrassed to something else entirely, something unfamiliar: fear. The kind that comes when a person realizes their carefully curated image is cracking in front of people who matter. Rodriguez looked at Monroe. Monroe nodded. "Sir Rodriguez said, standing straighter than ever, would you mind if we joined you at your table?" Henry blinked. "You already are." "No, sir," Monroe said. "I mean officially." Lydia, watching from the counter, understood immediately. She walked over with the little brass plaque Mrs. Patel kept in the back. It was a gift from a local metal worker, used only on Veterans Day. She placed it on the table. "Reserved for those who served." It gleamed. Monroe tapped the plaque and looked directly at Calvin. "This table, this man, you tried to erase them today. But from now on, this seat will remind every guest who walks in what service really looks like." Calvin stood unsure, clenching his fists. "You think this will go viral? You think this will make me resign?" "No," Henry said. "I think it will make you remember." Then the unthinkable happened. A teenage boy, maybe 14, in a JROTC uniform, stepped forward. He had been sitting silently with his father at the counter. He removed the pin from his collar, a small metal anchor, and walked slowly to Henry's table. He placed the pin next to the brass plaque. "My dad told me never to speak unless I had something worth saying," the boy said. "Sir, I hope one day I'm half the man you are." Henry couldn't speak. He just looked at the boy, his hand gently resting over the pin. Something in him broke open decades of silence, of sacrifice, of being invisible, and the tears came slow and quiet down weathered cheeks. Behind him, Calvin shifted, clearly affected. He opened his mouth to say something, but Monroe stopped him with a look that said, "Not now. Not here. This moment doesn't belong to you." Instead, Monroe rose to his feet and turned to the room. "Every one of us who wears this uniform owes a debt to men like Henry Callahan. Not because he wore the same flag, but because he never stopped serving. He doesn't need a speech. He doesn't need medals. What he needs, and what all our veterans need, is what this man never got enough of: respect. Applause. Not prompted, not polite, but thunderous, real." It echoed through the diner, through the streets, into every phone that had been silently recording. The kind of applause that isn't just for the man in the chair, but for every person who ever felt forgotten. And Calvin, he didn't leave in a huff. He didn't argue. He sat down quietly in a corner booth alone. Maybe for the first time in his career, he listened. As the applause faded, Monroe looked at Henry and asked, "May I ask, sir, what was your rate?" Henry smiled. It was small but deep. Hospital corpsman, Fleet Marine Force, 2 tours, Tet Offensive. The room was silent again, but this time out of reverence. Chen nodded slowly. Doc, you don't buy your own meals around us. Not ever again. Henry didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment, every scar he carried wasn't a burden. It was a banner, and every man and woman in that room finally saw him not as someone sitting quietly in the corner, but as someone who had held up a nation long after his tour ended. And as they gathered around table 3, drinks were refilled. Sandwiches arrived, chairs were pulled closer, because no one eats alone at the honor table. Stay tuned for part 4. Because next Sunday, this diner becomes something even Calvin Mays never saw coming. Subscribe now and comment the word stand if you believe that when one person stands up, others will follow. The story isn't done. It's just becoming legend. Part 4, we reserved table 3 for those who never quit. He used to eat alone. Now we have to add chairs. It started with one extra seat, just one. The Sunday after the confrontation, Lydia arrived early to unlock the doors of Liberty Diner, only to find someone had already left a bouquet of yellow roses taped to the front window. A note was folded beneath the ribbon for Henry Callahan. We never knew your name, but now we'll never forget it. Inside table 3 had been reset with care. Silverware polished, napkin folded like a triangle marine style. The brass plaque gleamed under the morning light, but Lydia knew something had changed. Because this time she didn't set just one chair, she set 4, and by 11:40 a.m. every single one was taken. Henry walked in a minute later just like always. But this time he didn't walk into silence or stares. He walked into nods, handshakes, and respectful quiet. Monroe, Chen, and Rodriguez were already seated. But so were 2 other men he didn't recognize, an older African-American veteran with a Vietnam ribbon on his collar and a younger woman in a National Guard shirt with a prosthetic arm. The honor table had become something else. It had become a beacon. If you believe veterans deserve more than once a year thanks, comment, never forgotten, and share this story. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more moments that prove dignity still lives in this country. Henry looked at the empty seat, hesitated, then smiled. Monroe stood as he always did and pulled the chair out for him. You saved a lot of lives in Namdok, Monroe said quietly. Now you're saving more just by showing up? Henry shook his head. I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to, Rodriguez said. The right things show up when the wrong ones go too far. Then the bell above the diner door rang again. In walked someone no one expected. It was Calvin Mays. Not in his suit, not with his entourage. He wore jeans, a navy blue polo, and an expression most people wouldn't recognize. Shame. And something else, resolve. He didn't walk toward table 3. He walked to the counter, stood silently, waited until Lydia noticed him. I'd like to speak with Mr. Callahan, he said, voice low. The diner grew quiet again, like a breath held. Lydia looked to Henry. Henry didn't flinch. He nodded once. Mays approached slowly. He stopped a few feet from the table. I was wrong, he said. No preamble, no speech, just that. Not just that day, for years. I forgot who I work for. Henry didn't say anything, but his eyes narrowed. I read your record, Calvin continued. Silver Star, Navy Cross, commendation for pulling 6 Marines out during the Tet Offensive. And yet, for 20 years you worked janitorial shifts at the same clinics that denied you benefits. Rodriguez looked at Monroe, stunned. Even Henry seemed unsure of what to say. I didn't know, Calvin said. But that doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't, Henry said finally, voice firm. I'd like to do something, Calvin added. If you'd allow it. What could you possibly offer me? Henry asked, not unkindly, but with the weight of someone who has lived through promises broken. Calvin reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card. He laid it gently on the table. It was a lifetime VA priority care card marked with Henry's name and a red stamp expedited honor access. I can't undo what happened, Calvin said, but I can make sure it never happens again. Not to you, not to any veteran who walks into a room like this. Henry looked at the card, then up at Calvin. Then don't just give me a card. Come back next Sunday. And listen, are you? Full, Calvin said. Every Sunday if you'll have me. Just when the air felt like it might settle, a new ripple shook the room. The door opened again. A young man walked in, short haircut, brand new navy dress uniform, a nervous look in his eyes. He walked straight to Henry. My grandfather served with you, the boy said, voice shaking. He passed last year, but he told me to find you. Said you were the reason he made it home. Henry blinked hard. What's your name, son? Mitchell. Jacob Mitchell. Henry stood slowly and extended his hand. Welcome to the table, sailor. The boy sat. Monroe offered his untouched cup of coffee. Chen moved over to make room. Lydia brought another plate without being asked. Mrs. Patel, watching it all from the kitchen doorway, stepped out holding a metal sign. Quietly, she approached the wall behind table 3 and mounted it in place. It read, The Honor Corner, no one sits here by accident. From that Sunday on, veterans from all over the state began showing up. Some drove hours just to drink coffee with strangers who felt like family. A retired Marine gunnery sergeant donated a folded flag. A Vietnam nurse brought Henry a worn letter he had once written to a wounded Marine's mother. Local schools began field-tripping students to the honor table, where they would sit and listen not to lectures but to real stories. And Henry, he never asked to speak, but when he did, people leaned in like it was gospel. We don't quit, he said one Sunday. That's not a slogan, it's a way of life, Rodriguez added, and we don't sit when someone's being shamed. The tradition grew. Photos were never allowed at the table, no hashtags, no politics, just presence. One week, Lydia counted 27 veterans who passed through the diner between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., and not one of them had to sit alone. Henry had become something larger than a man. He had become a reason, and still he stayed humble, still quiet, still the first to arrive and the last to leave. He signed nothing, accepted no interviews, just shook hands and listened. But as the sun set on that 4th Sunday, as Henry sipped the last of his coffee and looked around the full table, he whispered something to Monroe. Maybe now they'll remember we were here. And Monroe replied, They won't forget, sir, not while this table stands. Stay with us, because part 5 is coming, and what happens when Henry's seat is empty will remind the whole country what service really means. Subscribe now and comment honor if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, not just shared. The final chapter is next, and it will stay with you long after the screen fades. Part 5, he wasn't loud, but he made the country listen. He was once asked to leave a table. Now the table is never empty. The chair sat untouched, coffee poured still steaming, newspaper folded just the way he liked it. But Henry Callahan was not coming through the door. That Sunday Liberty Diner felt different, quieter, slower, as if the air itself remembered. Lydia wiped the same countertop twice. Monroe stared out the window longer than usual. Rodriguez rolled a challenge coin across his knuckles, but never flipped it. Chen, who rarely spoke more than a sentence, tapped his foot once every 4 seconds, like a metronome counting time that refused to move forward. Henry had passed away in his sleep the night before, peacefully with his boots by the door and a folded flag on the mantel. He was 80. No headlines, no ceremony, just silence. but silence in the right hands can be thunder. If you've been following this story from the beginning, now's the time to comment, listen below. Because some voices don't need to shout, they just need a chair, a coffee, and a moment of your attention. And if this story touched you, hit subscribe. We tell stories that don't make the front page but change hearts forever. At 11:42 a.m., Monroe stood up. He walked to the honor table and placed Henry's navy cap, the one he always brought but never wore, right on top of the plate. Chen added a folded cloth napkin shaped into a triangle. Rodriguez placed the laminated veteran ID. Henry dropped that very first day under the fork. Then Monroe cleared his throat. He didn't want recognition, he said, but we will give him remembrance. The diners fell silent. Lydia emerged from the kitchen holding something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. It was a brass plaque. She read it aloud. Table 3. For the ones who never needed to raise their voice to raise us all. Then she mounted it on the wall just above the seat where Henry used to rest his crutch. For the rest of that day, people came, not out of curiosity, but reverence. A Vietnam vet who hadn't left his house in 6 years shuffled in with a walker. A Marine widow left a Polaroid from 1968. A young boy in Cub Scout uniform stood in front of the table and saluted. And then just before closing, Calvin Mays returned, not with media, not with fanfare. He walked in alone, wearing the same VA badge he once wielded like armor, but this time it wasn't clipped to his shirt, it was in his hand. He walked to the counter, asked to speak to Monroe. I'd like to donate this, he said, setting down his badge next to the cash register. I no longer deserve to carry it. Mrs. Patel approached. Calm, composed. You've done that already, Mr. Mays, she said softly, by showing up and shutting up. Mays nodded. Then may I sit? She looked toward the honor table, then gently shook her head. No one sits there. Not anymore. But you're welcome to sit near it and listen. And he did. Every Sunday from then on, Calvin Mays sat in the back booth. He never spoke, never led. He poured coffee, he served sandwiches, he memorized names. He became a student of something he once thought he owned, honor. Monroe continued the tradition. Every week he would read aloud one handwritten letter from a stranger touched by Henry's story. Some were from veterans, some from teenagers. One came from a prison in Ohio. One was from a senator. They all said the same thing in different ways. Thank you for reminding us who we are supposed to be. Rodriguez, who once barely looked up from his plate, began mentoring JROTC students at the local high school. Chen organized a transportation group to drive elderly veterans to and from the diner every week. Lydia created a veterans book where people could write names, dates, and memories because some stories don't survive without pages to live on. And the honor table. It was never empty. Never again. One week a mother brought her daughter to see it. The little girl looked confused. Why is nobody sitting there? She asked. Monroe knelt down beside her. Because someone sat there once, he said. And we're still learning from him. She nodded, then pulled a sticker from her backpack, a little gold star, and placed it on the edge of the table. For the man with the quiet voice, she whispered, That sticker is still there. Some stories demand to be told. Others, like Henry's, just ask to be remembered. So remember him. Remember the veteran who never shouted, never asked for anything, never raised his voice, but made the entire country stop and listen. Henry didn't die alone. He didn't die unknown. He became the voice for the voiceless, the seat for those left standing. The silence that made noise. He wasn't loud, but he made the country listen. What about you? Will you listen? Will you stand when others are forced to sit? Will you speak when others are silenced? Or better yet, will you remember, so we never repeat? Subscribe if you believe honor doesn't end when the war is over. Comment. Remember Henry below because some chairs are never truly empty.